Hi everyone, this is Sharan here. Welcome to the day 7 of Learning Data Science in 100 Days series. So today the topics that we are going to cover are functions and Lambda function. So we are going to see why function is required, how to define a function, how to use them, and also we will be going through few of the examples of Lambda functions, when and why they are being used. Okay, so we will get into the functions. So in order to define the function, what we need to do is we need to define using this statement. So def here is defining, and then func here is the name of the function. So we are defining the function here, and this function does nothing but it just prints two values. It prints a hi and it prints bye. What we need to notice here is there are three print statements in total. So there are two print statements which is intended with 4 spaces. So if you see here, so there are 4 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this indentation is really important. So when you have a function, what happens is it will consider all the statements to be part of the function unless there is an return keyword or there is a line where there is no indentation, which means that here this print statement starts from the beginning. So what happens is these two lines will be considered as part of the function. So this is the function and this is not part of the function. So what happens is when I try to execute this one, so the function is something that will be assigned. Later this function will be executed. So these statements will be printed only when we call this function. So nothing happens here, and since this statement is not part of the function, this is being printed. So if in case I indent this with 4 spaces, so as you see here, if I specify only one space, it shows up as a red because the indentation needs to be perfect. Like it needs to be, if it is 4 spaces, it needs to be always 4 spaces. So if I execute now, what would happen is nothing would be printed, because what happens is all these 3 statements are being considered as part of the function and nothing is being printed. So let me just roll back to what I had. So I execute this particular statement. So what happens is the function here that we have defined, func, has 2 print statement. It should supposed to print hi as well as bye. So when I call the function here, what happens now is, so you can see this function is called here. So it prints the first line, goes to the second line, prints the second line as well, and so that's how when we call a particular function, it goes to the function and executes whatever is present here. So usually there won't be just a print statement. So we use function normally if we want to, if there is something that is getting repeated multiple times. So in order to avoid duplicating the line of code multiple times, what we use is we make use of function, and I make sure that we don't just duplicates like a number of lines. Like whenever there is a set of operations or an expression that is getting repeated across the project, we create a function and make use of the function so that it enables the reusability. So that's about the function. Now let's see what kind of operations we can do using a function. So the first one is like kind of an addition operation. So here we are defining using def statement, and the name of our function is add underscore function, right? Add underscore func, and it would have one variable as an input, and what happens is it returns by adding a value 2 to it. So now let me just execute this function. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass on the value 5 to it as well as 10 to it, and then see what happens. So when I execute this one, so as you see, when we pass 5, so it goes to this particular function, adds 2 on top of it, and prints 7. And similarly, when we pass 10, what happens is it goes to the function, adds 2 to it, and then prints it. So So let's say if I add 20 to it, so I need to re-execute the function. So if I just execute this, nothing happens. So what happens is I need to update the function by executing this. So now this function is updated. So now when I call, what happens is it gets added by 20. So when I pass 5, it returns 25. When I pass 10, it returns 30. So what happens when I pass and string to it? So here, since I'm passing the value 10 within a double quotes, this would be considered as a string. So when I pass a string, it throws up an error, because when I try to add an string to an integer, it will throw an error, and hence it fails. So what happens if I don't pass any value to it? So if I don't pass any value to it, so again it throws an error, because here it is expecting an value, and we are not passing that required value, and hence it says there is missing one required argument. So so these are all something that we need to keep in mind. So depending upon the number of inputs the function requires, those needs to be passed. In some cases there could be some input that is optional, so that should be fine, but at least all the mandatory input required by the function should be passed, otherwise it will throw up an error. So let's say we want to pass multiple values to a function and multiply all those values. So here we have defined a function here, and a multiplication function. So by specifying the asterisk here means that there is multiple values that would come up as an input. There is no defined value. It would be 2, it would be 3, 4, 5, it could be any number of values. So it's not a fixed number. So by specifying asterisk, the function would accept all the values that comes up as an input. There is no limit onto it. So then we initialize an value n to equal to 1. So then what we do is we iterate through these values. So if it is a list, so we iterate through the list and we multiply those items in the list by n. So first time the first value would be multiplied, and second time the value that we already had in the first position would be multiplied with the second element, and so on. And finally after the end of the for loop, we return the value n. So if you see here the indentation, you need to carefully notice that that there is an indentation here, and for the for loop there is an indentation here. So while executing the for loop, it executes only this particular statement, because the return statement here is returned to the start of the for loop. So only this particular expression would be considered as part of the for loop. So that's why the indentation is really important in Python. So if you have an extra space, it doesn't work, it turns into 100 as you see, or if it has one less space, so then also it doesn't work. So it needs to be exactly same. So if you use 4 spaces, it needs to be exactly 4 spaces, and here also if you see, it will be 4 spaces, 1 2 3 4. So 4 spaces is like a standard in Python, so it's better to go with the standards. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this multiplication function and then pass in a list of values to it. So when I execute the statement, what happens is like the each and every element is multiplied, and the final value is 120. So 120 is nothing but a 2 into 3 into 4 into 5. So all the values of the elements are being multiplied and the result is being returned. So as I said previously, when we have a function, so it will be executed until it notices an return keyword, or as we mentioned here, until the indentation ends and there is a statement which is starting same as the define statement. So here in this case we don't have a return, but since the print statement here goes back to the start as same as the definition line, so it stops here. So it considers only these two as part of the function. So either it we should either based on the indentation, or if it has an return keyword, so then it stops here. So that's how we define an function and we make use of function. So these functions are really important, especially in cases where there is a set of operation that gets repeated across the script or being reused across the project. So then those needs to be, it's better to create them as a function, so we don't repeat the part of code in multiple places. So then the second one is moving on to the Lambda function. So Lambda function is also very similar to the function. The key differences are the Lambda functions are generally called as a single use function. So those Lambda functions are generally or always like a single line, one line function. So their syntax is always lambda, and there would be an argument and there would be an expression. So the expression here would generally be the return value, the value that needs to be returned. So if you see here, what I'm doing is I'm just creating a Lambda function. So this is a Lambda function. So I'm using the keyword lambda. So this is an argument x colon, and this is the expression x plus 5. So this is the value that will be returned. So when I pass 5 to it, what happens is it goes to here, it will say 5 plus 5, and then it will return 10. So if I execute this, so you can see. So if I pass 50 to it, and what would happen is it would add 5 on top of it and then returns 55. So these Lambda functions are one line functions. So here is another example where we multiply the value by 5. So I pass 5 here and multiply that with 5 and returns 25. So all these are like a one line function. So the lambda can be passed as an argument as well. So it can be used in along with the sorting or along with the filter functions too. So that's one of the advantages of an lambda function. So here, as you see, what we are doing is we are creating an list. So this is an list of tuple. So if you see here, so each one of this is a tuple, and this as a whole is an list. So what we are doing is we have a list which has elements that are tuple, and we are going to use sort, and we are going to say t is equal to lambda, and so here this is what this will be the element that will be used for the sorting purpose. So when I say x of 0, what happens is in each of these tuples it considers the first element. So in this case, which is Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon and Tesla. So those elements would be considered for the sorting purpose. So when I execute this, so as you see here, the list is ordered based on the first element of the tuple here. So when I specify instead of 0 as 1, so then what happens is when I execute it, so as you see, the list is sorted based on the second element of the tuple here. So that's how the lambda function can be used in order to sort and list which holds maybe multiple tuples, or maybe it holds dictionary values to it. So another example where lambda can be used as an argument in an filtering condition. So here what we have is we have a list of numbers, and we don't want to print each one of them. We want to print only selected items from it. So let's see here what happens is what we want is we want to print all the element that when divided by 2 is equal to 0. So here what we use is we use within the filter condition we use lambda, and we say x divided by 2 if it is equal to 0, if there is no remainder, so then those needs to be printed. So since we pass this within the filter condition, so as you see here, it goes to the first element 1 divided by 2, so it's not equal to 0, so it's not getting filtered. So 2 it's getting filtered, 4, 6, 8 and 10 and so on. So if we say, let's say divided by 3, so then let's see what happens. Then we can see only 3, 6 and 9 are being filtered. So these are all some of the common uses of lambda function. So as you see, it's a one line function and single use functions too. So it can be, these lambda functions can be anonymous. We need not, for example here we don't have any name for these functions, so it's just passed on, like used as an argument in like a filter or a sort functions. So that's how we use lambda in Python. So there are a couple of examples for you to try to get comfortable with function as well as lambda. So I would say maybe spend some more time on learning Lambda as well as a function. Try out different examples that apart from what I have specified here, because in a data science project there would be a number of cases. For example, when we take a sentiment analysis, what happens is we might have to pass on multiple phrases and try to get the sentiment store for each one of them. So in those cases we need to define them as a function. So whenever there is a new input, we pass on the new input to the function, and let's say if it is a sentiment store in algorithm, so it computes the sentiment store and returns us the value. So the functions are definitely something that would be commonly used in a data science project. And Lambda is of course also like can be used in a lot of cases where, for example, without having these statement with these function here, maybe we could implement this with few lines of code, but with the Lambda function what happens is it helps us in implementing with just one line. So it's good to understand the use of Lambda functions too, and maybe make use of them wherever it is possible. So that's it about functions and Lambda functions. I hope you have learned something new today as well. So if you like this video, please give a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so that you get notified with any new videos.